Folks, thank you so much for tuning in here on Tuesday. I don't know if it just gets wilder and wilder every day, if it's just my imagination, but hang on, put on the seatbelts as you listen and watch the podcast today. We've got everything. Wait till you hear about what a judge just ruled, just what he sentenced an arsonist right here in the middle of the fires in Kelowna. Wait till you hear the sentence he got. It is a convicted arson. Things that are going on related to some of the wild and wacky races, political races in the U.S., but Canada does not have to take a second seat. Wait till you hear what a judge didn't do to a serial sexual violator who has no reason to be in Canada. Wait to see what the judge did there. And as far as brains at university, they're growing them. Stay tuned. We're going to get on it right now. The missile problem related to the lack of missiles, the dwindling missile supply that the United States has is continuing to be talked about. And we're seeing growing signs that that continues to empower and to encourage other attacks from not just, of course, Iran, but now new reports of North Korea and missiles being used, going into Russia, and just being used in an attack last night that killed 12 Ukrainians. So China and North Korea, Russia, all involved, not just against Ukraine, but in fact, China being implicated more and more along with North Korea in terms of supplying Iran. And here in Canada, we have the Prime Minister of Canada continuing to saying nothing but wonderful things about China and push Canada closer and closer into trade and other relationships with China while we continue to poke our fingers in the eye of our neighbors. It's really getting crazy out there. Retired Rear Admiral Mark Montgomery talking about the severe lack of missile supply and pointing to over the years, especially through the Obama years, the lack of missile production. So that's going to be a problem, a real problem, and it seems to be fortifying the nerve of the insane psychotic regime in the Islamic psychotic regime in Iran. At CBC, they even talked about this. CBC was doing some of the reporting on the 12 Ukrainians who were killed as a result of attacks from North Korea, missiles going into Russia. It's not only on the mainland in Iran and in Ukraine that we're seeing these terrorist activity increasing. I talked last week, I said, watch for an increase in these. Remember, we just heard a couple of things about increases in terms of cyber attacks on water treatment plants, water utilities in the U.S., now up to 30 cities reporting that their water utility plants have been attacked in a cyber way. This means what happens there is the ingredients that go into the water that are always electronically monitored. Of course, it might be chlorine, it could be other types of poisonous gas or poisonous substance going in. And increasingly, an organization being looked at that's behind this is called the Iran Cyber Avengers. And very difficult to go after these folks. Most cities don't have the kind of sophistication they need. So watch for this as that particular concern only increases. We're seeing with the Iranian situation and with them pushing back, and looks like Trump is not going to be able to make headway in Iran the way he wants to. So naturally, markets are jittery. However, markets that are based on their own oil and gas sales going up a bit because any companies to do with production and supply or refining oil and gas products, because there's going to be a continued demand for those products, those companies go up. That affects the market overall, even though individual companies might be going down. The Canadian, the TSX, here we have, it's quite funny to see some liberals running around claiming that some of the things the government is doing is resulting in strength on the Toronto Stock Exchange. But when you monitor and you look at it, what's bringing up the average? It's energy-related stocks, and it's technically because of Iran. So we're still watching that go up, and we'll see what indeed holds on there. The situation continues to go on with Iran, and not just attacks from Ukraine. Ukraine is launching attacks into Russia on Russian refineries. That affects supply also. So that means the price of oil and gas goes up. And Iran last night attacked facilities in Saudi Arabia, increasing their attacks there. The whole thing is reaching definitely, well, it's past a boiling point. And it's interesting, the types of refineries that were attacked in Saudi Arabia are ones that principally supply what's called ultra low sulfur diesel. Ultra low sulfur diesel is used in the agriculture community around the world. The farming community relies on that. And once you start hitting those, that means the price of diesel, the price of running those tractors and the seeders and the irrigators all goes up. And that means don't look for anytime soon a reduction in some of your farm products. And no, it's not because it is not to give an excuse to the government to do this insane thing they want to do, which is take over the food supply. That would destroy everything and we'd all be wind up starving. But watch for that. Is going to have an effect on the cost, input cost for farmers. A judge in New York City, this caught people by surprise, has made a ruling against the wacko, I'm sorry I have to use these adjectives, but this out of control mayor, Islamist communist. It's quite a combination. And as you know, there's a tax there that he's put in. It's called the pied-à-terre. Pied-à-terre, the French terminology referring to people who have more than one home, more than one residence. Maybe they've got an apartment that they rent out. And of course, that's bad from the point of view of a communist. And so Mondami had put this double tax on anybody who's got a second condo or a second home. And a judge has just ruled that he's not able to do that. Now, they think they're going to find a workaround, but could that be a slight momentary breath of reprieve for the insanity going on in New York City? Watch tonight because, again, looking at the U.S., now we'll jump to the Canadian market and see what's going on politically. But tonight, there's going to be a number of primaries. This is like a nomination contest for the various parties. And we're going to see over in Wisconsin, the woman running for governor there. She wants to win the Democrat primary, to be the one to run. Francesca Hong, she is way out, so far in left field, she's almost coming around to the right, as we say. She's a main spokesperson for the so-called Democrat Socialists, the Democrat Socialists in the United States. And remember, this is the woman who, in earlier comments, wanted to shut down evil things like Thanksgiving. Let's see if she wins that one. It's a real sign that the Democrats are electing amongst themselves. The rank and file are electing the real wackos in the party. We'll see what happens there. Another Democrat governor, and this is an existing governor, Maura Healey, has just passed in her state and just signed. It's called a no limits on abortions. Now, you remember in the overturning of Roe versus Wade in the United States did not put a stop to abortions, for those people who are thinking or saying it did. What it did was it took it out of the hands of the federal government regulating it, and it put it in the hands of each individual state. So on a state-by-state basis, they vote and they decide what they want to do relative to regulations on abortions. And the governor, Maura Healey, has passed, now joining 10 states, saying no limits whatsoever on abortion, no term limits. That particular state had 24 weeks, as most states and most countries in Europe even have a limit of somewhere around the 24-week mark. No limits now, right up to the very point of birth, an abortion can take place. And it's mentioned in the U.S. coverage on this that is, they talk about Canada. They said that's the Canadian position. So Canada influencing other jurisdiction there. We, of course, don't have limits in Canada either. And we'll see if this continues and if this is a factor in state elections, that there is now zero limit, even right up to the point of birth, on abortions. The New Jersey Assembly, in a very interesting move, has passed legislation, or actually what's going to happen is it's gone through the assembly, it'll go to a vote, and then on to the governor. And this would criminalize anybody who would want to in any way interfere in any way, even speaking against access to not just abortion, but to transgendered procedures. So in this particular state, in New Jersey, if the governor signs it, and there's every indication that the governor will, if you are a parent and you have a 12-year-old and the 12-year-old is being counseled by teachers or counselors at school to go ahead and have their breasts removed or have their genitals removed, you will be criminalized if you try and interfere with that. So for people who think that, by exposing all these things, that this stuff is going away, no, it seems to be increasing. And that's going to be taking in place there. And this does affect other jurisdictions. One jurisdiction looks at another and they say, well, they're doing it there, they're doing it here, just as Canada has influenced a number of these states in terms of taking all the limits off abortions. And so on it goes. Well, before we get too upset with how people are ruling on things in the United States, a labor arbitrator has just made a ruling on an issue at Calgary's Mount Royal University. It's a workplace issue, and has decreed and declared that it is a workplace hazard if any group at the university publishes or shows pictures of in utero or the size of a particular yet to be born child that was miscarried. You're not allowed to show x-rays because they say this triggers people, and it's being declared a workplace hazard to show pictures of unborn children. So that's a very interesting development. We'll see where that goes. It seems like in the U.S., the accusation had always been that conservatives or Republicans were the ones that were touting church and showing up at churches. It looks like the big leading Democrats are making it a habit of going back to church. So that's kind of exciting. We've talked about James Tallarico, the candidate in Texas, who keeps showing up in churches, brings his Bible, and uses the Bible to promote all of the Democrat causes, some really wild ones, even transgender stuff, bisexuality, and LGBTQ. He uses Bible verses. And now Gavin Newsom going back to church, or maybe he never went, I don't know. But it's good to see him in church. He spoke on Sunday at Fellowship Chapel in Detroit. And again, he used the Bible to defend all of his left-wing positions. So interesting to see the Democrats going back to church. Well, quarterback Aaron Rodgers shocked everybody on a widely followed show called The Pat McAfee Show when he talked about so many football players, professional football players, who got fake vaccine cards during the COVID lockdown because the NFL was, if you remember, insanely restrictive on this, wouldn't allow people to play, wouldn't allow people to even be on the team, even though they're playing and practicing outside, unless they took certain measures. And he talked about that, and people started to scorn him and say, oh, you're exaggerating. There wasn't that many football players who were getting the fake vaccine cards. And now another former quarterback, Cam Newton, very well-known quarterback in the NFL, also saying, yes, there was lots of this going on. Along with the fake vaccine IDs, it's just come out now that Anthony Fauci, who is being grilled, as you know, in a Senate investigation or a congressional investigation for what he did and didn't know and the truth he wasn't telling relative to vaccines, his phone had been subpoenaed. He had a government-issued phone, which, of course, he wasn't allowed to destroy, and they've been able to access it and get into it and find conversations that he had. For instance, this is on his texting. He is on one of his texts admitting and saying, he did this privately, never said it publicly, yes, that for pregnant women, if they're getting their second vaccine, and he used the word theoretically, it is theoretically possible that this could increase the risk of miscarriage in the first trimester. He had always denied ever saying that, and now he's been caught red-handed. We'll see where that goes, knowingly possibly putting women at risk. Some people are talking about, AI and the brain power that it has and how it's going to continue to do all kinds of wonderful things. And actually, I do think the possibility is there for that, and we should be embracing it and certainly not falling behind China in terms of AI development. So, but while the AI brain is developing, you've heard people say sometimes insultingly to someone, they said, oh, grow a brain. Well, at the University of San Diego, they are definitely growing brains. Article there by Claire Evans, who works for Wired magazine, and talking about brain organoids. Brain organoids. So it's an organ, and they actually grow the brain from just a few cells, and it starts to multiply, and they've got these brains working. They're growing them. This is a true story. And as they do now, they've been able to develop to the point where the brain itself, this new grown brain, just sitting there in a jar and hooked up to wires, can actually guide robots. It shows brain patterns similar to that of a soon-to-be-born child. And they're also doing experimentations with the brains they're growing in terms of giving the brain massive doses of LSD and other drugs just to see how the brain will react. So, folks, I don't know what you think, but that's what's happening. In news, CBC has reluctantly, very reluctantly, does not want to talk about the fact that that the majority of fires that start, these forest fires, are in fact human caused, many of those by arson, far more of those than by so-called natural causes. And I did a notice on this. I posted something on this last week, got hundreds of thousands of views on it, as the increased arrests of people being accused of arson with these fires, not just in Canada, but we've talked about that in the US and in Europe. And the CBC doing their report on fires and the fire situation, which is particularly drastic in the province of British Columbia, where I live right now, talked about, they even throw in the adjective, lightning-started fires, as if no other fire can exist. CBC is just so pathetic, so intellectually depraved that they can't even relate to the fact that firefighters and criminal organizations around the world are talking about the number of human-started and arsonist fires. And here, right in the midst of that, just yesterday, there was a court case right in Kelowna, that's where I am right now. A guy last year had been arrested for lighting fires on what's called Knox Mountain. Knox Mountain is a very prominent feature in Kelowna, very well-known area for hiking and walking. And he was actually caught, apprehended, charged, and found guilty of lighting fires, an arsonist, right in the midst of fire hell that we are suffering right now. And he was sentenced to, wait for it, I've been asking for minimum sentences of arsonists who are burning down forests. And this is just, and right in the light of a death being announced yesterday in what's called Summerland, which is south of Kelowna, 80-year-old woman dying as a result of the fire. And what did the judge do? If ever there was a time to send a signal, here the person was found guilty, open and shut case. And the judge says 21 months. 21 months, that means you divide by 6 in most cases relative to probation. This guy might be in jail for 60 days, maybe 90 days. And CBC did not even report on that, didn't report on the fact that we had guilty right here in the Okanagan, an arsonist, and that he got the slightest tap on the wrist. And it's time to be calling your members of parliament and saying, wake up and do something relative to this crime, forest killing and people killing and animal killing crime of arson of the forest. Well, on another crime, 51-year-old Marc-André Poirier has been arrested, quite rightly, because he's being charged with death threats on the Prime Minister, and he quite rightly should be arrested for that. But going back into his file, this guy's got a long criminal record, including the burning down, another arson, the burning down of a church, the burning of a church in Toronto in 2017, and he's wandering around the neighborhood. Judges everywhere. I don't think, and folks, we can't gang up on judges and you can't threaten them, but folks, think of who you're voting for. These are largely, not 100%, largely liberal appointed judges. And this is where they're taking us in terms of the things that matter most to us. So ask yourself, if you continue to vote liberal, you are the one putting these judges in place. You are the ones that are going to bring, you the voters are the ones that are going to bring more and more of this lack of justice. The left always talked about seeking justice. Yeah, seeking justice, except on those who should be punished for crushing justice. Well, going along with that, the publication called Toronto Crime Watch, reporting today on a case, and the man's name here is Madhani Yuhans, golly gee darn, that sounds like a Muslim name. Anyway, Madhani, and he's not a citizen. I want to say this again, not a citizen of Canada. Multiple crimes, including now another one, violent sexual assault. And Canada's border agency, and I used to be in charge of Canada's border agency, the CBSA, when I was Minister of Public Safety, they begged the judge, they brought all the evidence forward. They said that the guy, he's not a citizen, and he doesn't even have protected status, asylum protected status. They begged for him to be sent back to Eritrea, where he comes from, and the judge says, no, you know what? It's just too risky to send him back. He's not a citizen, violent criminal. He doesn't have protected status. And let me clarify. It was the Minister of Immigration who made the decision. I'm sorry, I don't want to be dumping on the judge there. This is the federal Liberal Minister of Immigration. This MP is an MP in Halifax, Nova Scotia. And I can tell you something. This decision to not deport this fiend who's out there sexually assaulting women with no protected status. I'm sorry if I get upset at this, but it just drives me crazy. And this particular guy, he's going to be still roaming around. The Prime Minister had to approve this. I tell you, I know, I sit in cabinet, or I've sat in cabinet. The Minister of Immigration, they just didn't do this on their own. The Prime Minister Carney would have approved of this person being kept in Canada, violent sexual assaults on women and other crimes, not a protected person. He's from Eritrea, and he's being allowed to stay here. Think about that, please, when you're voting. And Lena Diab, or she might pronounce her last name, Diab, by the way, is the MP from Halifax. Call her constituency office if you're out there in Halifax, if she's your MP. Let her know you don't like this. When people don't hear, silence is compliance, folks. So you're as guilty as anybody else if we're not making our voices heard on this. Well, talking about Islamic attacks, and that's always been a problem in Pakistan, the Islamic attacks against the Christian community. They use so-called blasphemy laws. If somebody talks about Jesus, they do that at great risk. But something a little bit positive, I'm just going to say. So Pakistan just yesterday and today is celebrating National Minorities Day, and they allowed to be celebrated as the key person for National Minorities Day, Remembrance Day in a way, a gentleman by the name, and it was an elected person in Pakistan, and I met this gentleman when he was still alive, Shahbaz Bhatti, and I met with him, and even at one of the meetings I had with him before he went home to be killed in 2011, many of us were saying, Shahbaz, you don't have to go back. You can stay here. They're going to kill you. He went back, and Pakistani Muslims killed him, burst into his house and killed him. And the government there is allowing him to be recognized on National Minorities Day. And Reuters is reporting in terms of these riots, Islamic Muslim-related riots that wind up killing people because they say they violate blasphemy laws, and this has been focused on Christians there. From 2021 to 2024, their average of 7 of these mass riots a year, resulting in the killing of Christians and the burning down of churches. And this year, they say there's only been 1 so far. So is this a glimmer of hope? We can always hope. And congratulations, I'm going to say, to the government of Pakistan for allowing our dear friend Shahbaz Bhatti to be recognized. Folks, lots of things to think about. Thanks for tuning in. We'll catch you tomorrow.